And here we are for another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I have to apologize that I basically botched the last one by not showing up, basically. So after daylight savings time, which Australia doesn't have, I basically kind of mistook the starting hours. I had 10 o'clock in my mind but in reality, that's kind of when the show would end if it would to run 2 hours or so. So I don't know. The 10 o'clock was in my mind, and I kind of processed that as the starting time for some strange reason. And I probably forgot that I started much earlier, normally, even before daylight savings time. So that was all my fault. Blame me on that one.
Yeah, no, that's cool. In fact, it's even worse than that because in Australia it's state-based. In North America, I know some parts of, I know in Canada, some provinces didn't have it. But I think that's true in the US too, isn't it? That I think some states don't have it.
Well, I'm not very sure about that one. I think some don't really change. I'm not really the authority on that one.
But here, yeah, it's only some of the states, and so I think probably in future we should standardize on UTC or something like that. So
yeah, right. It might have been Arizona. I think Arizona is the one I remember because I think Chris Voddie's from there. And he was kind of bragging one day that, well, we don't have that.
Yeah. Yes, in all seriousness, one of the reasons they raise here is it actually confuses the cows, and it seems funny, but it's actually true. The cows get used to milking time and so forth, and as the time suddenly changes, it completely messes them up. And then 6 months later, it changes again, and they get all messed up again. So that's actually one of the arguments in favor of not doing it here.
Yeah, it's a complete waste of time.
Yeah. I'd be quite happy if they shifted permanently to daylight saving, which the UK considered doing a few years ago, and I think they've not proceeded with it. Well, I know they haven't proceeded up to this point, but I think they may have cancelled the plans. I thought that was a really good idea because you get the benefits of daylight saving, but you don't have the brokenness of changing your time every 6 months. So
yeah.
Anyway, there it is. Yes, maybe one day they'll do it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we have a list of stuff to talk about since we've racked up like 3 weeks.
Exactly, that's right. Yes. So Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lerman is something we've talked about before. That's been a trial that's been going on in Australia. So Brittany Higgins alleges that she was raped by Bruce Lerman in Parliament House. The matter went to trial, and the trial, it looked like it was going to be a hung jury. Really was. Even the media was talking about that being a likely outcome. A hung jury being where the jury can't come to a decision, and they're given multiple opportunities to go back and look at it. They still can't. Basically, the trial is declared a hung jury, and the entire process can start all over again. So that's what it looked like was going to happen. Then one of the jurors brought material into the jury room, which was prohibited, and left it there. And one of the cleaners found it, or one of the security guards cleaning up, and took it to the judge, and it was declared a mistrial. And then the prosecution announced they were going to proceed to another trial in February 2023. And then last week, it was only about a week ago now, the prosecutor has come out and said that they are not proceeding with another trial of Bruce Lerman, that they're putting the matter to rest, and they're doing it for Brittany Higgins' mental health, has been their argument. Which is an interesting thing, isn't it, to put out there. Now, a few things have come out too, a few additional things. The Brittany Higgins was absent for about half of the trial. The trial actually went for about 10 days, and she was giving evidence, and suddenly they announced she wouldn't be in court for a few days. And it's now come out that she was actually found wandering the streets by police at one point and was then taken to a mental health facility. Apparently, she's back in a mental health facility at the moment. And so basically that's the position they've taken. Now, somebody has leaked some information. I'm not quite sure where that's come from. I imagine the state will probably be looking at some sort of investigation into this. But one of the things that's come out is that the Australian Federal Police, who were investigating, have said they didn't think there was enough evidence to even take the matter to trial.
Wow.
So yeah, so I said from really early on that unless the state had some sort of damning secret evidence that it really seemed difficult to understand how they could even proceed to trial. And now we know that the federal police have said, no, actually, we don't think there's enough evidence to go to trial.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking right as you were kind of talking about the details as to why they're not even going to bother going back on trial. You know, we care about the mental health of the false accuser more than the falsely accused. It seems like that's the narrative behind these sort of things.
It does. Yeah, it opens up an interesting possibility that this was an opportunity for them to basically exit the entire process. I mean, and I've said from the beginning, we don't know what happened. Okay, what I will say is that it seemed very clear that there wasn't enough evidence because of the long delays involved and the lack of physical evidence and all the rest of it. Now, of course, it's come out that even the federal police said they didn't think there was enough evidence. But yes, this. One possible interpretation is that it gives them a way to graciously exit the process with a reasonable excuse. Now, I think that we should really look at the actions of the prosecution here, what we call the Director of Public Prosecutions here. It's a bit like the DA in the US. It's ultimately the person who's responsible for these sort of prosecutions. And I really think that they need to look hard at why the decision to go to trial was made. The whole thing seems to have been very political to me.
Yeah, that sounds like the case.
Yeah. So it appears at this stage that that's the case. So as I understand it, in a case like this, and now my Latin's probably terrible, but there's a Latin term nolle prosequi, which basically means that they're putting it to rest and they're not prosecuting. I remember from my own training in the police that it was pointed out that a matter that was left in this state could theoretically be brought back later, a year from now, a decade from now, right? Although I think that's unlikely in this case. But his lawyers, Bruce Lerman's lawyers, can go to the court now and ask for a permanent stay, which basically the court would then rule, that's it. It can never be brought again. Permanent stays are pretty rare, but a number of lawyers getting them is pretty rare. But a number of lawyers have said in Australia that in this case, they think that he's probably got a pretty good chance of, because of how political it was and what the media circus it was, and now the case has collapsed. A number of solicitors have said that they think that it's likely that he probably can get a permanent stay. And that would be it. It'd be over. And Bruce Lerman has engaged another lawyer for the civil matters and is now considering defamation against at least 2 TV stations and 1 TV personality. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see then. So this isn't over in that sense. Both Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lerman are actually pursuing these sort of avenues. Brittany Higgins is looking at something like, I've heard figures like between $1 and $3 million that she's looking at getting. But Bruce Lerman, as I said, is looking to sue for defamation because he's currently unemployed. He had a $200,000 a year job before this, and that's a very, very high paying job. It's 3 times the national average.
Yeah.
And now he's unemployed. So
I see.
Yes.
Right. Does he have any chance for recourse at all in Australia?
It seems to be, I think, well, a number of sources seem to be suggesting that, yeah, he does have a pretty good case for defamation. So apparently the solicitor, the barrister he's engaged is a pretty high profile and specialist in these sort of defamation cases. So I think they seem to think he's got a pretty good case.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, getting a lot of names confused because we're talking about Brittany Higgins now. Now there's a Brittany Griner or whatever we have to talk about. Now,
yes.
I'm ashamed to admit it, but I'm not really brushed up on the subject. Can you tell me what went on here?
Yeah, sure, no worries. So one of the things we, of course, get is there's so much going on with with the areas that we look at, and we can't always keep up with every particular thing. I did the same thing. I don't keep up with every particular case. In some cases, I rely on other people at A Voice for Men, such as yourself or someone else, to brief me on them. So I didn't keep up with this case for a while, but I have more recently. So Brittany Griner, I wasn't sure of the exact pronunciation, actually.
I'm not sure either. So yeah, I'm just kind of going by conjecture, I guess.
So we'll go with Griner. So Brittany Griner is a US citizen who's been who we could say is a bit woke and has been pretty critical of the US government and saying some derogatory things about the United States and so forth. And she went to Russia and she had a small quantity of a substance on her that tested positive for THC, and she was arrested in Russia. Now, she was ended up being given 9 years. So, and it does seem that there's a political aspect to this with everything going on at the moment. Anyway, she's been in jail in Russia for 10 months, and she's just been traded with an arms dealer, and who the United States had in jail. And apparently he does have some blood on his hands. That's my understanding. He's not just an arms dealer. He's also been close enough to the action that he's considered culpable in some deaths, so directly. So as I understand it, and he's now in Russia, and she's back in the US. And there's really quite a lot of pushback from the US government to the US government about the fact that there's really not a lot of equivalence here. Somebody who's convicted for legitimate crimes and serving a sentence, a long sentence for those crimes, that are clearly harmful to many people. He's now free in Russia versus Grana, who's come back to the US. And there's another aspect to it too, that there's a Marine in Russia in jail as well, and he's been in jail for longer. And some people felt that he should have got priority over it. Apparently, some sources in the US government have said they did raise him with Russia, but the Russians wouldn't consider the trade for him. Whether or not that's true, I can't say.
Yeah, but that seems to be the forefront on most people's minds that are reacting to this, I think, and understandably so, I would say.
Exactly, that's right. So, yeah, I mean, if you think back to various other trades, like, for example, during the Vietnam War and so forth, when there'd be trades, it was first in, first out. So the people who were captured earlier would be the ones at the top of the list then to get released. So, and one might think that would be a reasonable way to do it in a case like this too, where this gentleman had been in Russia for longer, and therefore he would have priority. The US, as I said, some US government sources are claiming that the Russians wouldn't consider trading for him. Maybe that's true, and they think they can get more for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, go
on. No. And there are also there's a lot of spin nowadays. They're kind of focusing on the fact that this is actually a trans woman. I think it is. I don't know. I think that's something I've been seeing on Twitter. So there's a lot of kind of focus being kind of drawn towards that from the conservative side as well. I don't know if it's for the right reasons or not, but still, it's understandable that this is kind of, why this person, as opposed to
exactly. That's right. Yes. Now I do think of something that happened in Israel. It's probably going back about 10, 15 years now. And an Israeli soldier was abducted by Hamas on the Gaza border. And Israel ended up trading a huge number of prisoners for him, but I think it was 1,200 or something. But I think that they were careful not to trade anybody who, as they said, had blood on their hands. So the idea was it was more lesser offenders that were traded, but it was a huge number. And of course, in Israel at the time, that was a huge issue. Actually, question is they were happy their soldier was coming home, but at the same time, a lot of criminals were being released. So, but I think in that case, Israel was careful not to have anybody who was a more serious offender in that group.
Absolutely.
And here it is only one-to-one trade, but it's somebody who's committed quite serious offences.
Yep, for sure.
So there it is. So that's I think that's becoming a bit of a problem for the Biden administration in terms of a lot of people being quite unhappy that this trade was made. It'll be interesting to see. Greiner has, as I said, been critical of the US government in the past. I'll be really interested to see if she is in the future.
That's I'm reminded of that one. Wasn't she the whole BLM kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. Exactly. There were a number of things there are a number of things she was involved with. Actually, Australia had an interesting case a few years ago. This was actually a three-way trade. We still don't know what the third arm of this trade was. So there was a gentleman, his name was Sigley, his first name escapes me now, but he was, could say a careerophile? I don't know if that's the right word for it, but he absolutely, he's an Anglo-Australian background, but he absolutely fell in love with Korean culture, decided for reasons best known to himself to study in North Korea rather than South Korea as many others would have chosen to do. So he was actually studying Korean literature in North Korea, in the DPRK, and he's fallen. He was in there for quite a while. He was running some sort of side business where, with the government's approval, where he would have run tours into North Korea. Because there are a number of companies with the North Korean government's approval that are now running these sort of tours for Westerners into, or for foreigners into the DPRK. Well, something's happened, and he's fallen afoul of the North Korean authorities in some manner, and he's been arrested in North Korea, and he's just kind of disappeared. So Australia has made inquiries about what's happening with him, and I think they must have got some information he was in the custody of the government. Sweden has very good relations with North Korea, and so Australia has requested the Swedish intervention, and the Swedish diplomat went to North Korea and secured his release. Now he's been returned to Australia. There's some sort of agreement. I think where this is relevant, there's some sort of agreement where he doesn't talk to the media at all about what happened. Okay, so that's part of the agreement. And I think the idea is if he did, it would mess it up the next time they might have to do something like this. So the next person would lose out. So he's been really good with that. It's been a couple of years, and he hasn't said a word to the media. He's just disappeared into the Australian community. Probably just very helpful, thankful that he's been removed, that he's been saved. Perhaps he's studying. Perhaps he's planning. I don't know if he's studying Korean literature in South Korea or Australia now. I don't know, but anyway. But there was some sort of agreement. I was going to say there's some sort of agreement where some Iranians that were being held in North Korea were traded back to. I won't say, but there was some sort of three-way agreement that happened, and they ended up as part of this trade. Anyway, it's interesting. I'll have to refresh my memory on the details actually. And
exactly
about that. Yeah.
Well, the cultures between North and South Korea are so sufficiently different that when you think of Koreanophile, you'd think of South almost exclusively. It's because the state of mind and the way things are done are completely different,
Well, exactly. That's right. If I understand it, it was ancient Korean literature he was studying, which I suppose both countries may have. But they apparently got some sort of commission in the Koreas where they try to keep the language together. But apparently they're having real problems with it, and I think that probably because the ideology of the North would be influencing the language.
It is my understanding that there's some subtle differences in. I don't want to say dialect, just the way some things are said. Some words might be different. Someone can correct me if they want, but there's some subtle distinctions in the language, to be sure. And it's as you say, it's probably reflective of that state mentality, I suppose.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, the Juche, which I think is how it's pronounced, the North Korean version of communism, which is about self-reliance.
Is it Juche or is it Juche?
Juche, maybe you're right. You might be right. I'm sorry.
Right, yeah.
Yes, right. I think you may be right. Yes, yes.
Right. It's the phenomenon is called autarky. I think it's called basically this idea that you can thrive in isolation and you can do just fine without any kind of outside influence. Now, of course, this is a fake idea, right? This is not something that you can just do and get away with and prosper just fine. You need trade, right?
But and I think the proof is in the state of North Korea, which is continuously reliant on outside assistance and so forth.
Exactly. But of course, inside the country, everybody is taught that the great leader controls the weather and is supreme above everybody, the world, and all other countries are just suffering because they're just not using the Juche idea. And
that supernatural aspect of it, I find really interesting, because communism, of course, is supposed to be atheistic in nature. So the fact that they tie in this supernatural aspect is quite interesting.
Make no mistake, communism is just as mystical as the most supernatural-minded of religious thought. Let's just say that.
Yes. And when I know when one of the leaders was born, there was a Kim Il Sung.
I think Kim Il Sung is the first one.
So it was Kim Jong Il. When Kim Jong Il was born, he was supposed to be born on the mountain, which is holy in Korea. Something was supposed to have happened with the weather right at the moment that he was born, apparently. So Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Color be suspicious whether that really happened or not.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, but you know, it is my understanding. Hope nobody gets in trouble for saying this over there, but you know, they're, you know, most of them I think are kind of wisening up. I think, or have been wise to it. They just kind of, you know, stay quiet because they don't want to get in trouble.
Well, it's the same problem that's right in other dictatorial governments as well, where people are aware of these problems, but they have to be very careful of what they say, or themselves and their cousins and more of their family will be arrested and taken off. I mean, we saw that in Nazi Germany and lots of other regimes too, where people were saying these things, but they had to be very, very careful.
Yeah, right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and definitely in the Soviet Union too.
Yes, absolutely. That's right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, well, speaking of free expression, I've got something to talk about. Well, recently, I don't know if trending is the right word, but some buzz in our side of Twitter has Jordan Peterson complaining about anonymity.
Oh, yes. So go. I don't know a huge amount about what's going on, so please do tell me.
Well, I think I think this was supposed to be in response to the fact that Peterson on his YouTube channel, I believe, had Benjamin Netanyahu. Is that how you pronounce it?
Netanyahu?
Netanyahu, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
The Israeli
on his.
So Israel's been changing prime minister so often lately. I'm losing track. I think he's prime minister again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he is too. Yeah, but he had him on his channel, and I think that was he was reacting to negative comments about that, right?
Oh, okay. Go on.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, throat's clogging up.
No, that's all right.
In like the most inopportune of times, but basically he's kind of started to pathologize anonymity in general in response to those commenters, and calling them narcissistic and psychopathic, basically.
Because they were commenting anonymously and criticizing Netanyahu, right, or something like that? Okay, right.
Right, yeah. Right. His exact quote, tweet says, "The issue that those touting the advantages of the anonymity." Now, this is where he's trying to respond blanket to everybody saying that, well, anonymity is also a good thing. In fact, there's more good than there are problems. And he's saying the advantages of anonymity won't face is that an emerging scientific literature indicates that a very large proportion of such posters are characterized by the presence of psychopathic and narcissistic traits.
He's saying narcissists are operate anonymously. Wouldn't that be the opposite of narcissism?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely a good point. Yeah, right. But he's saying that, you know, anonymity, you know, if you're you know, making posts like that, you know, posts he doesn't like, I suppose. You know, he thinks he's going against trolls, but you know, everyone's a troll if you don't agree with him.
Yeah. And I've heard the term misused even in recent times.
Exactly. Yeah, it's right. Widely misused, but that's a subject for another time. But exactly. Yes. Yeah, I mean, lots of people have been kind of pointing out that this is not a good take. You know, YouTube personality Styx Hexenhammer, he's been kind of critical of that one. And Paul Elam's noticed it too, you know, pathologizing to people who disagree with Peterson. That's what Paul said. He's absolutely right, of course. And I've got something else to add to this one. So in our day-to-day life, we're basically anonymous, actually, by virtue of the fact that we're not forced to volunteer all information about us if we're out in public. You know, when we talk to someone, we might exchange an opinion or so. We don't know their name unless we already know them anyway. You know?
Yes, I do. So you're saying if you talk to a stranger in the street and happen to start chatting to them, yes, you can release information or not as you choose. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not an internet exclusive phenomenon.
That's a good point, actually.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Peterson appears to be making this point as if this was only an internet phenomenon.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have to tell you something along those lines, actually. So I'm I'm probably a bit of a city guy, really. I grew up in the suburbs and I've spent time in the city and so forth. And I personally feel more. Some people complain about the anonymity of cities. I actually find it comforting. So if I've heard a lot of people say if they grow up in a small town, everybody knows your business. And my limited experience with small towns tends to suggest that's true, right? Mm-hmm. I quite like. Often I'm walking down the street in the city, and I like the fact that nobody knows who I am.
Exactly.
This is a feature for me, not a bug.
Right, especially considering who you are. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's quite a nice feature of cities, actually, that you can. In fact, one of the things about cities, of course, is that there are such a wide variety of people available that you can, and we see this with the internet too. You can find people who have the same interests as yourself. There's enough there's economies of scale, and whether it's medieval recreationism or whatever it happens to be, you can find people and then that goes along with this idea as well. You can sort of pick, you can choose who you're going to be your friends, just like you can online, and who you're going to hang out with.
Exactly,
and that goes along with that anonymity as well. It's part of that flexibility.
Yep. And one other person pointed out to me that there's a good point. It's not really anonymity, it's pseudonymity in the internet a lot of the time. Because, and here's an analog I want to bring up. It's like, so the other day I was in my local game store and we were playing Magic, the Commander format, right? And, I'm still, since moving back to Florida, I still don't know the names of everybody, right? I still don't know most people personally, right? Yep. But there's this one guy that played the same Karn Silver Golem commander deck that I played, right? But not the same exact deck, just the same commander. And I've kind of identified him as my Karn brother, right? And that's kind of how I knew him, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even know his real name until just the other day. But that's kind of how I've identified him, right? I recognize he's the guy that played the same commander that I did. And
to a certain extent, you didn't have to know his name. That's all right.
Yeah, sure. But that's kind of how the pseudonymity works, right? It's like I'm trying to think of an example of someone I don't necessarily know the real name of. Like, it's not coming to me, but just take some user on the internet, and he's got a pseudonym there. Okay, here's an example. Someone could, nobody has to tell me, but Nerdrotic, that's one of the people commenting on like nerd culture, I guess it is, for lack of a better term. I don't know his real name, but that's how I identify him, as the Nerdrotic guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that's kind of how this works, and it's kind of foolish and surprising to me that Peterson would take such an anti-free speech stance,
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I've always viewed it as a personal choice. I have always identified as myself online. So when I got involved with the men's rights movement, a lot of people warned me and they said, no, you should go under a pseudonym. I made the decision not to. I said, I've always been myself online, and that is what I will do. But I've always viewed that as a personal choice. And if somebody else wants to go under a pseudonym, that's entirely up to them. I don't know what their personal circumstances are and what the risks are for them. It's up to them to make that decision. So, yes, it should be, I think, a personal choice.
And it's the same with me too. This is my real name. In fact, somebody, a friend of mine in the Intactivist community, was surprised that this was my real name because because to him it sounded so cool. Right.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean. My user handle references my real name anyway. So
yes. I was on. It's a bit of an aside, but recently I had a situation on Reddit where I was posting some articles from ABFM, and somebody kept claiming that I was a sock puppet.
Okay.
I just responded, this is my real name, and you can see, and here's me on voice fed and so forth. And this is why are you calling me a sock puppet? And I was just amused by this, really. And I did it.
A sock puppet of whom?
I don't know. I never found out. But I asked him twice. But I was just kind of amused at this. And
right. Yeah. Yeah. And, as you say, everybody's going to have their own reasons and their own circumstances for being anonymous or pseudonymous, right? Yeah. In my case, though, I want to try and use the fact that I use who I really am as like a advantage if I can, because that way people know what to expect, and I could build from that.
Yeah.
So I won't kind of accidentally be discovered and then have everything crash down where I don't want it to.
Which is where you've protected yourself, because that's right. Because people who do take on a pseudonym do have that concern about what happens if they're real, and they get doxxed. A lot of them get doxxed. That's the truth. Right. I've been out the whole time. Okay, the response I've got is that has actually been really, really interesting. I've had a few negative impact, minor negative impact, just online and stuff mainly.
Yeah.
Never anything real world, right? But I've had a lot of people come up to me quietly in the real world and say that they support what I'm doing and so forth. And so if anything, the real world impact has been positive. I wish it could say it'd be more positive, because a lot of people are afraid to speak out, but I've overwhelmingly had positive feedback from people in the real world versus negative feedback.
Absolutely, yeah. And and once again, this is not the farthest thing. This is the farthest thing from an admonishment of those who choose not to.
Exactly. As I said, it's and I said this at ICMI 17 when this topic came up. Actually, it's a personal choice. I don't know what your circumstances are that cause you to make that decision. That's entirely up to you or someone else to decide what makes sense. Versus some people are in jobs where the consequences could be quite severe.
Exactly.
Some people, so if a person was, say, a police officer, for example, and they wanted to get involved, they'd almost certainly have to go under a pseudonym, because that could compromise their position as a police officer and so forth. So everyone has to make their own choice.
Now, you were a police officer yourself, right?
I was, exactly. That's right.
If we can talk about
no, that's fine. I've openly said that a number of times. Okay. I was a police officer in the Queensland Police Service. It was quite a long time ago, though. Now it was over 20 years ago that I left the police. I had a 25th year reunion with my old squad from the academy recently. So that was actually really, really great to see we were formed into squads at the police academy, about sort of 20, 25 people, and we'd go through together. And it was really, really fantastic. Of the 25 or so people, about 10 are still serving police officers. There's one guy who I swore was going to be a lifer, who resigned after about 15 years. I really thought this guy was just going to be, that was it. He was just going to go and retire, as a commissioned officer in the police or something. But no, he actually resigned after about 15 years and did something else. So
I see.
Yeah, but I got caught up for jury duty recently. Okay. And in Australia, and and if you're a former police officer, you can't be on a jury.
Really?
Really, if you have any sort of, I think that's generally true everywhere. So if you have any sort of connection to the judicial system at all, including ever having in Australia, having been a police officer, they won't allow you on a jury. So when I got my jury notice recently, I just popped my little scan of my appointment as a police officer and sent it off, and that was the end of that.
Oh, okay. So they didn't.
They don't want. Okay. No. They don't want me on jury duty. Yeah. No, they don't because in the jury. So the idea is judges in the higher courts, judges rule on matters of law and juries rule on matters of fact. In the lower courts, a magistrate can do both. But the idea, they don't want the jury to know about the law, so they don't want anybody who's got a bag. They don't. So lawyers, judges, police or former police, no, they don't want them in there. So,
gotcha. Yeah, I don't know how similar things are with the U.S. and Australia or anything like that, but it's pretty funny to think about it. I've known some people who have been called to jury duty multiple times, and I still haven't.
It's a bit of. I was called as a university student actually, but my university got me wrote a letter which basically said it'd be too much. It would take too much out of my course, and and then they let me off that time. So I've never served in a jury. So even though I've been called twice, I shouldn't be called again though. I think because now they've got that. Now they've seen I'm a former police officer. They shouldn't actually call me again. I think.
Okay.
Anyway, it's an interesting thing. I understand the obligation and so forth, but at the same time, I'm not always happy with the results we see with juries, where people sometimes, people can bring their own ideologies in. I think in some cases, perhaps the judges, in my view, might be better to make these decisions.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, did you get involved in men's issues after the police force or during?
I did quite a way after, but I had the same. I was always concerned about these things, and I did see firsthand some problems. I had a male victim of domestic violence come to me once, and I was only a junior officer. I was only in a few years, and I got absolutely stonewalled by all my attempts to provide assistance to this man. Just absolutely stonewalled. Nobody was interested. And unfortunately, I was too junior to be able to do much about it on my own.
Right. Yeah.
I really needed assistance from senior police, and they just weren't interested at all. It was just, it was an eye opener for me, actually, seeing that, and a few other things I saw as well. Interestingly, though, and I will say this, and Queensland Police was more open to reciprocity in domestic violence when I was serving in the 90s, I think, than perhaps they might even be now, and police services are now, as the Duluth model has come into Australia after that and has really has influenced them. There was definitely a bias in there, of course, but at the same time, they warned us. We were trained to watch both partners in the situation and not to turn your back on either of them. Right. Because of the risks that either could become violent towards you or the other partner and so forth. So there was that recognition there. And I wonder what the training is like now in comparison, or whether, because actually here in Queensland, there's just been a review where they're saying that Queensland Police are being too hard on the women, actually, is what they're saying, in domestic violence situations. And they're now wanting to push the training to be more gendered, actually. So this has just come out. There's just been an inquiry here, and they've said this. They said that there's a lot of misogyny in the service and so forth. Yes, it's the usual story. So, I suspect the training will be pushing that position a bit harder, actually, in the future. Unfortunately,
that's sad. Right, but not unexpected. Considering
exactly
how gynocentrism it's nowhere close to being solved.
Exactly, absolutely right. Yeah, even though I think in some ways we've seen some progress, sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We do see progress. We do see the wider community starting to talk more about these issues and accept that women can be violent in relationships and so forth. And then we'll see something like this. Yeah, so it does seem to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Unfortunately,
that seems to be yeah. 2 steps back, steps, a step back in a different direction, and now the steps become somewhere else. It's really complicated.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
What else is on our list?
Well, let's see. We had a couple of other things here.
Women suing Twitter.
Oh, yes. Yes, right. So Elon Musk has, of course, taken over Twitter, as everyone I'm sure knows. There's been a lot of firings and so forth, and women have been disproportionately impacted by this, and they're now apparently suing as a group. This is the report that a large number of women are now suing Twitter and possibly Elon Musk himself for some sort of gender discrimination there. Right. My suspicion is that Elon is probably pretty savvy, and he's been able to. I suspect he'll be able to defend the decisions of the company quite effectively. My understanding is that in terms of developers, for example, they've done an analysis of activity in things like Git repos where people are committing code and tickets that have been closed and so forth. So I think there's some quantitative analysis that's going on, and they've made the decisions based on that, which means they'll probably be able to defend them pretty easily. But I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Only that it's just as well. It's fine with me that they're fired, considering the kind of garbage they were doing on this site.
Seems there was really a lot of people in Twitter. I know personally, I don't agree with everything Elon Musk says or does, along with Jordan Peterson or a lot of other people. I think working from home has a lot of advantages to it and so forth, and particularly if we're really trying to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, that it ought to be something we should be doing. And he's forcing everyone back into the office, and I'm not so sure that's going to give him the result he wants. But at the same time, it does seem like there were a lot of people who were kicking back and putting their heels up at Twitter. That's the impression that it seems to have come out of it.
Well, yeah, letting shady content kind of run rampant while suppressing anything that's actually kind of truthful. you know where their
Yes.
priorities are. So
Yes, and that's been a problem too, and that's a problem, of course, in ABC, which of course is the company now that runs Google, since they changed their name. And that's a problem in a number of places. Facebook, Meta is the company that runs Facebook now. They've all done this thing where they started out with the main app being the name of the company, and they're now going to change the name of the company.
I see.
So Meta runs Facebook, Alphabet. My mistake. Alphabet runs Google.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I actually think the name Alphabet, which is the company that runs Google, I think is actually related to the LGBTIQ plus, as in a reference to Alphabet there. I actually think that's the reason why. It's called Alphabet.
Yeah, I haven't even heard of the whole Alphabet being the parent company of Google.
It was I believe it was just a name change, because it was previously called Google Inc. or whatever, and then they've changed it. Well, no, Woodman Inc., but they've changed the name. And same thing. Facebook changed theirs to Meta. Twitter obviously hasn't. So it was privately owned.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's there is a lot of wokeness going on in the big tech, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm, exactly. I want to have a comment now that we mentioned about the subject of working from home. Aside from your points, I mean, it's just economical sometimes to just kind of be able to work from home when you can, right?
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes, maybe there are some times that going into the office might serve some kind of use. But aside from that, we can manage, if we're in that line of work, we can manage it from home for the most part. And
absolutely.
Right. And especially, it's funny because, Elon Musk supposedly is conscious and for, parental involvement in children. He kind of cites himself as an example, I suppose. I something like that. I've heard something like that. But that's going to facilitate. Working from home is going to facilitate that kind of familial closeness a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Right. And it'll be much more conducive. Like I've always commented on the irony that some conservatives say that we need both parents, the father and the mother, but at the same time they seem to want men to be off somewhere and away from the family to protect and provide, as it were. So
it's actually really interesting when they talk about the traditional family being the man working away and the woman staying at home. In actual fact, that's only really a product of the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, to a large degree, everybody worked where they lived. And mother, father, kids were all out. Almost everybody worked on a farm, and mother, father, kids were all out. Yes, the women would have split their work between the house and the fields, and men would have been out in the fields. But the truth is the kids were out in the fields too a lot of the time. And that's not just the boys. The girls were doing it too. They all had to understand how it worked.
Right, Yeah, I'm actually reminded of something. Basically, in these kind of societies where even the kids have to kind of work out in the fields and something like that, some kids couldn't go to school. They actually can't go to school because they had to work in their own family.
Absolutely, and that was actually fairly common even up until a couple of generations ago, even in Western countries. I've personally got relatives who I know had to leave school at grade 8 because they're essentially needed on the farm.
Right. My mother was telling me about her situation growing up because both sides of my family were of farming origin, and mother was saying that her mother, my grandmother, basically kind of had to sneak out to school to learn something to escape that. The general fact that she couldn't go to school, that she had to work on the fields and everything like that. Understandable, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, back then, I guess the drive to learn is much more something we take for granted nowadays. Now, all things considered, the public school system is not something that's worth a whole lot of support, in my personal opinion, but that was a different time. Learning was go ahead.
And I was going to say, the kids would generally go to primary school and learn sort of become literate and learn some basic arithmetic, so they're not getting ripped off when they're getting paid and so forth. But beyond that, yeah, well, after somewhere around there, 12, 13, they were pretty much expected to finish their schooling and get to work. And like I say, often on the farms. This was only a couple of generations ago in Western countries. This sort of thing was going on.
Yeah. Right. And now that things like cars were more accessible to people, so are the opportunities away from the home. Right? Yeah.
That's right. Exactly.
I'm not even saying turn back the clock here. I'm just telling a straight up fact about the matter, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. There were men, going back, who would be on military deployments or ships out of say England exploring the world, and they would be men away who were away for a long period of time. But most men were pretty close to their homes and would have been actively involved in the lives of their children.
Right. Yeah.
So that was the norm, and so this is why I think that, in fact, one of the points I actually putting in my book is that one of the things I talk about is actual fact that I propose that we're actually returning to the historical norm of both parents being active. That I think the Industrial Revolution sort of kicked things out of kilter and had men away from home a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And we're actually shifting back now to. But a lot of people claim it's something new, both parents being involved. No, I think we're actually going back to where we were before the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a delightful irony in this. Technology got parents away from the home, but more technology is bringing them back.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And it could be that the Industrial Revolution, which I, by the way, think is still probably going on. I don't think it's actually.
Sure.
I think we're still. It's an aberration in history, and I think there'll be some sort of correction. It's obviously advanced, it's made us much wealthier, but in terms of it was disruptive to society, and I think society will gradually adapt, and that will involve, as you say, with the improved technology, it's brought both parents back into the home.
Yep.
Which is why it's so important that we have the opportunity for dads to be involved as well, and we don't have dads excluded through the court system, which happens too much.
Exactly.
So, we were talking about working from home too. So I've actually been a fan of working from home. I've been quite fortunate that I've had many opportunities to do so through my working life. But I found the pandemic in some ways had a bit of a silver lining. And one thing that happened was a lot of people got to see that they could work from home, and that they were happier in many ways working from home, which is why we're now seeing quite a bit of pushback in the workforce for people to continue doing that at least part of the week. As you say, there are sometimes reasons why you need to go into the office, and that makes sense. Yep.
Yes. Right.
And in actual fact, and if I could offer one point too, a hybrid approach might be better than fully working from home, because the argument's been made, if a job is fully remote, potentially the employers can employ from anywhere, versus if it's a hybrid approach, they're still going to have workers that are close to the office, but the workers are still going to benefit from spending more time in the home and not wasting time commuting.
Exactly right. Yeah. In my case, it was the same. Like, once this whole thing started back in Minnesota, I was basically taking my equipment back home and working from home. So it's basically changed it completely. So
you were pretty much continuously working from home then?
At that from that point, and then the next job I've got is 100% from home. It's based on the company's based on some other state, and I'm
oh, nice.
Yes, but I'm here in Florida. So
nice, yes, very good. So yes, you can enjoy the weather, the lovely weather. Excellent. Good. So one other thing I wanted to mention, because we've actually been going on, I think, close to an hour now.
We're going close to an hour now. Yeah,
close to an hour. When we might even talk about this more perhaps next time. Definitions. So my view, I don't know what your thoughts on it are, but for a long time it seemed very hard to pin down feminists. I spent quite a lot of time trying to pin down feminist definitions and record them in Wiki for Men and so forth. And it was often very hard to find definitions, even when you're looking at their source documents, so forth, and their books that they've got as in gender studies courses. And when they did present a definition, they tended to be pretty waffly and vague. I'm sensing a change there in the last year or two. What I'm seeing now, it seems to me that they are starting to present definitions, but the definitions are really, really weak.
Right.
And I think this is probably something we might want to continue on in another episode. But I'm now started to record these weak definitions, but I find it really interesting that they've shifted from sort of vague, waffly definitions that you can sort of fit to whatever situation you need, to ones that are so weak they almost don't matter. Let's see if I've got one to hand.
Yeah, while you're looking for that, I think I want to offer that, you know, they've been kind of changing terminology as the era has kind of gone on. First, I think Peter Wright kind of pointed this out at one point. What was it? First, it was like male chauvinism, and then it was patriarchy. Now it's toxic masculinity. And
yes, this is another good point, that the terminology tends to change. In fact, I think that feminism has about a 3 to 5 year sort of fashion range, where a term will remain fashionable for about 3 to 5 years. Think about this. When was the last time anybody told you to check your privilege? Okay. Now, you might have had 1 or 2 people do it, but really 7 or 8 years ago, you couldn't turn around without somebody saying it.
Right. Yeah.
Another one was a trigger warning. Honestly, every single website had trigger warnings on it and so forth, but they kind of got a bit bored with that, and they don't really. Occasionally you hear it still, but they don't talk about trigger warnings all the time. They've moved on now. So every 3 to 5 years, I think they change the terminology and so forth. And I've hypothesized that this could be involved. This could be that feminism may have a high turnover among young adherents. That people, that these young women particularly, come to university. They sort of get really wrapped up in university. They stay just long enough to pass it on to the next generation. Then they leave university to get a job, sort of get a bit of a clue, quietly drop feminism, by which time now younger women have come up. And my hypothesis is that this is continued. There are people who stay in it, but a lot of them kind of stay in it for 3 to 5 years and then leave. That's my hypothesis. And that's what we see as this change in terminology as a result of that. So I don't know. I can't prove that, but that's my suspicion to a large degree. I think that women are entering it and exiting it.
Exactly.
And then trying not to admit they were ever involved.
Oh, that's a good point, because I was about to bring something up. Basically, see, people are freaking out about anonymity. I'd rather freak out about this. It's this kind of hiding behind the fact that hiding behind vague definitions and obfuscated premises.
Yep.
A very postmodern way of kind of dealing with things. Maybe that's why postmodernism exists, because they can be non-accountable for anything that is currently going on that they were in, or what was going on that they were involved in at a given time. Basically. Yeah,
that's a good point, and it's absolutely tied up with feminism. And I suspect a lot of people don't realize this. Postmodernism really grew up with feminism, and occasionally I hear people say, "Oh, but there are so many different sorts of feminism," and my response is always the same: on paper, yes; in practice, intersectional feminism has been dominant for 20 to 30 years.
Exactly.
So, So intersectional feminism is really the dominant form,
right?
And everything else is just academic waffle. So and then so postmodernism is absolutely tied up with feminism and so forth. These things often exist on a continuum. Not every feminist is into postmodernism, not every postmodernist is a feminist, but there's a significant overlap.
Absolutely. Were you looking at something, trying to find
just one example.
I distracted you, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. What is toxic masculinity? So masculinity becomes toxic when men feel they need to conform to rigid gender norms, which include acting like a bully to maintain a consistent competitive advantage. So now they're calling it bullying. This is interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Avoiding losing at all costs. So competitiveness. So they are starting to frame it in more concrete terms, but in my view, it's such a weak definition. So bullying, competitiveness, these are enormously broad topics they're bringing in. The third one is restraining one's emotions except for pride and anger, which are the only acceptable masculine emotions to express. Well, I actually disagree with that, but it's still sort of very, very broad ideas they're bringing in. Showing strength and aggression in moments of conflict. Well, I would suggest actually a lot of men don't do that. And being dominant over women and other men, which is typically displayed through microaggressions. So
another term you don't really hear anymore.
Exactly, that's right. Exactly. In fact, I just actually listened to a a podcast recently where they mentioned it, and the definition of microaggressions was so weak that it had virtually had no meaning anymore.
Right.
So, and I've actually added it to my list of terms that I think have now become so weak. But I was just going to say, this definition that I saw posted by feminists recently that I just read doesn't mention stoicism, and stoicism was something they always talked about in the past.
Right. Well, lots of bad premises in that collection of definitions. Especially, I take especially take issue with the competitiveness, because in my mind, competitiveness is not about winning at all costs. Competitiveness is about winning within the rules of the game.
Yeah,
that's not all costs. You know, all costs would be like cheating and like gaming the system or something like that.
Yeah. And I think the majority of men will try to act within the rules. I think that tends to be a very masculine thing to do. So if there are a set of rules, they will try to do their best within the constraints of those rules. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying to do your best within those constraints.
Yeah. And my first ICMI speech was about competitiveness. Go watch that. I think it's a pretty good way to describe it, if I do say so myself.
Absolutely. In fact, let's get it reposted on ADFM, so that'll give people an opportunity to look at that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, before anyone mentions that, I mispronounced MGTOW terribly, and I shouldn't have. I freely admit my mistake.
So how are you pronouncing it? Sorry.
MGTOW. It's so cringe.
Oh, right.
It's worse than MAGTOW.
Oh, you mean in the speech she did it? All right, no worries at all.
Yeah, yes, cool. I don't know. I don't know why I did that. I knew how it was pronounced.
That's cool. Yeah, actually, I think I know. Now you mentioned, I did remember that, but I had forgotten that actually. So on the pronunciation of MGTOW. So MGTOW is the standard pronunciation, of course. You will hear some Australians say MGTOW. Actually, I think it's fallen out of use now, but for a long time you did see some Australians say MGTOW. But yeah, MGTOW is the, I think, internationally agreed pronunciation.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we could probably talk about definitions more. I suspect we've probably covered quite a lot there.
Yeah, to be sure. Yeah.
I'll be to talk about them more next time, I suspect. But yeah, why don't we do that when we talk more about the definitions? Things I might see if I can dig up that definition of microaggressions as well. And because, as I said, patriarchy, microaggressions, toxic masculinity have all now got such weak definitions. Oh, the definitions I've been hearing for patriarchy have been absolutely fabulous lately.
Well, they're taking something very small and insignificant and trying to turn it into a crime. That's kind of the almost magazine print like inventions of these kind of new terminologies, just so they have somebody can have something to lord over someone. Basically, that's just
I think that's what it is. Exactly, that's right. Well, I think probably we could finish up.
Yeah, to be sure. I think that was a good full hour, I think.
Absolutely.
No slowing down, nothing. It was a good episode.
Exactly. Yes, 2 weeks' time, and we might have some more people in for our discussion next time.
Yeah, we'll definitely try this time.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Thanks, Vernon.
Yep.
Talk to you soon.
Yep. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.